So should I start? So hi everyone, good morning. From the ones who are in Europe, or maybe good afternoon or good evening, depends on where you are in the world. So today it's my pleasure to have to co-chair the webinar that we are going to have in some minutes. I think we are going to wait 2 or 3 minutes more so the people can join this link. So yeah, talk to you in a while. So, hello everyone. So, it's my pleasure to actually start the first webinar from the Scientific Communication series. It's a webinar that it's hosted by HUPO in ECR in collaboration with the Mice Dynamic. So, today we have the great happy to listen from Catriona Robertson. So, I'm Jessica Getz. I am from the Stockholm from Karolinska Institute here in Sweden, and I will be chairing this webinar together with Paula Burton. So, Paula, you can please introduce Katriana for us.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jessica, and welcome everyone. I'm based in Melbourne, Australia, as is Catriona, so it's the evening for us. Really quick intro before we start. So Paula Burton, as I said, co-founder and CEO of Mass Dynamics. We are an agent-ready omics platform. We've been sponsoring HUPO ECR for the last 3 years, actually coming up to 4 years now. And I've had the pleasure to be able to sponsor the 3-minute thesis competition. So every year I get to co-host it. I get to see the great presentations that come out. And this concept has come together. I tapped Catriona on the shoulder after being introduced to her through a friend. And she seemed like the perfect person to be able to convey and communicate the best way to communicate your science. Lots of communicate words in there, but that's okay. And so I'm really excited because I hope you guys take away a whole bunch of notes from this. And for those who are participating in the 3-minute thesis competition, hopefully this can really help guide your presentations. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Catriona, and I'll pop up a bit later on in the panel to ask Catriona a whole range of questions if there aren't. If there's some from the rest of the audience, we'd love to hear it. And I hope to see everyone in Singapore later on in September. Over to you, Catriona.
Thank you so much. I think, do I have to wait for someone to? No, I can just take over. All right, I've taken over.
You're off.
So you may have heard the idea of if a tree falls over in a forest and there's no one around to hear it, does it make a sound? Don't have an answer to that. But I want to pose a different question to you that's perhaps more relevant to what we all do. If you are working on a great research project, you might be working away in a lab, or you might be working at a desk, or you might be doing both, and no one knows about what you do, has it made a difference? So science isn't really done until it's communicated, and whether that's us talking about it with each other as other people in science, or whether it's talking about what we do to academics, people in industry, people in government, or anyone, the general public, we need to be communicating our science. So today I'm going to be talking about denaturing our jargon and giving you a few pointers as to how you can talk about your science in an accessible way. So essentially, we're going to go from your complicated science to a hot, accessible message. I do love puns. Alrighty. So I kind of have already said this, and I think, with science, when we're doing it, we publish papers, we give conference presentations and things like that. And the thing is, many more people are probably going to hear you speak about your work compared to the number of people who are going to read papers that you publish. And so we may as well commit to being the most effective and engaging speakers that we can be as scientists. And so I'm going to talk about how you can start, how you can tell a story, and then how you can kind of bring it all together. So if you want to be sharing your science and making it memorable, you want to hook your audience in, draw them from the start. And that's what I tried to do. It's a little bit harder when I'm not talking about science and I'm talking about communicating science, but I attempted to start with a hook, something that's a little bit different, something that's different from the standard, hi, my name's Catriona, and I'm going to talk to you about communicating your science. If you stand up there and you say something a little bit different, then you're going to stand out. And then once you've drawn your audience in, you want to tell them a story. And I remember hearing that so much. I'm like, oh, okay, tell my science as a story, tell my science as a story. But what does that actually mean? And I'm going to share a little bit of how you can do that. And then lastly, you want to end with impact. You want some sort of call to action or some sort of take-home message or perhaps a link back to your hook. That can be a nice, beautiful circle. But however you choose to end, you want to make sure it packs a punch rather than people just going, oh, wait, oh, you're finished? Because that's going to be the last thing that they remember. So that's your chance to give a take-home message. So I'm going to talk about all of these elements, and if you have questions, please feel free to type them in as we go, but I think we decided that it might just be neater to go for questions at the end, but definitely pop them down before you forget them as we go. Alrighty. So in terms of your first impressions when you're communicating, you want to capture your audience's attention. Everyone has such short attention spans. Sometimes it's so easy to just zone out, especially at conferences and things, or when there's a whole series of talks, it's easy to zone out. And so you want your talk to stand out. And then you want to think about what vibe you're giving off right from the start. I don't mean that you have to put on some sort of persona. You don't have to not be you, because you being yourself is going to be the best. But think about how you're sort of standing up there and making a presence and sort of owning that space and owning the fact that you're giving a talk. And like I said, you want to be you. So I mentioned the idea of a hook, and when I talk about a hook, I mean, you're casting your net, you're baiting your audience to kind of bring them in so that they think, oh, this is going to be an awesome talk right from the start. Because first impressions, as the last slide said, really do matter. And there are different ways that you might be able to do this. You might think about how your work directly impacts or is relevant to people's lives. Now, I know that there's a difference between people who are doing more fundamental research and the people who are doing translational research. If you're doing translational research, it's kind of a little bit more obvious, that link. If you're doing fundamental research, that's not to say that you can't do this, but perhaps you might have to think about how the link works a little bit better. So my background is in immunology. I was studying very fundamental, what are these immune cells? What do they do? And to people in my field, I would not be like, oh, I'm working on a tuberculosis vaccine, or I am, finding a way to stop skin allergies. However, my work was a building block for other people to then build on that and perhaps work out how we can improve the tuberculosis vaccine or how we can stop skin allergies. So while I would never claim like my work is going to cure this thing or things like that, you can certainly highlight depending on your audience, but especially if it's a broader audience, that's their link, that's their hook, and you can say, I'm working on this disease, or I'm doing this thing that is relevant to your life somehow, or relevant to the lives of people that you love, or perhaps it's something that you might use one day, and then you can say, yeah, I'm working on a piece of this puzzle. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you might use puns or rhymes or jokes, and I do love puns, hence the title of this presentation. But a joke and a pun or something like that can be nice to just build rapport with the audience right from the start, and it kind of allows you to connect with them because it feels like, oh, this is this is great. Or perhaps you might tap into pop culture or hot topics, things that people are thinking about. You might ask a rhetorical question that challenges your audience. It could be something that they've not thought of and they're going, oh, I don't know the answer. I've never thought of that and I don't know the answer. I'm going to listen to find out. Or, it could be perhaps something that they are thinking about and then you're like, I'm going to share the answer with you. You might start with an analogy, an anecdote, or a scenario, and I know that these are different things. With the anecdote one, it could be something like, I've seen people do things like DNA is like Lego, and you're like, what? How? And so you want to keep listening to learn about how is DNA like Lego. And with the analogy or the scenario, it could be, imagine here's this awful situation that we want to move away from. And I'm going to tell you how we can. Or it could be, look at this great thing. Don't we want to work towards this? This is a really positive thing or outcome that we want in our lives. And I'm going to tell you how we can make this happen and a reality. So those are just some examples of stories that you can tell. But when you do tell stories, that's a little bit more emotional and people can get invested in that. Or perhaps challenge people. This one, you have to be a little bit more careful with. It does depend on the audience. With perhaps more of the general public, they don't always want to be challenged. But when you're talking to other scientists, perhaps, so pick your audiences, perhaps, we all do like a little bit of a challenge from time to time. So it could be something that for example, the first thing that comes to mind is dark matter. Only 5% of the matter in our entire universe is stuff that we can see. Everything else we can't. And that's kind of like, whoa, what? So that can be something that challenges us a little bit. And you can play around with whichever ones of these work for you. You might find that for different audiences, some work better than others. And I've already mentioned, number 5, you might not work. It might not work for the general public. But just pick ones that you feel comfortable doing, because what's most important is that you are being yourself when you present. I am trying to smash through because I know that we haven't got much time, but yeah, this is why it's really important as we're going, think of questions, because I'm now going to jump from, you've hooked your audience in. How do you tell a story about your science? Now, the reason that we need to tell stories is that storytelling can be one of the most important tools that you have to share your research and to communicate your research. Whether you are presenting or you're writing, telling a story and having the idea of, I'm actually telling a story here, is a good idea. Because we listen to stories, we understand and remember and connect to stories. And engaging people on perhaps a more personal level with a story is more of a key behavioral driver for change. And it's also a little bit better to get cemented in people's brains, because facts don't always convince people, and people can forget statistics, people can forget numbers, but they won't forget how you made them feel. And so if you tell a story, they'll remember that more. And that's not to say don't give a statistic, don't give a fact. If you want to say, for example, X number of people suffer from this disease, that's fine, but also tell the story of this disease and how you are combating it. So if we think about what a story is, forget science for a second. A story, whether it's, a film, a TV show, a book, it's a narrative that builds up. You're introduced to characters. You're like, okay, I know who all these people are. I know what the context is. And then there's a problem. And you want to know what the solution is. So if we take Finding Nemo, for example, okay, we're introduced to these fish. They live in the anemone. Oh no, but Nemo's gone. Nemo's missing. Nemo's been taken. How are we going to find Nemo? And then you have all these problems along the way, all of these challenges that Marlin the dad and Dory are going through to find Nemo at the end. And if you think about any book that's a page turner, or any film or TV series where each episode ends on a cliffhanger, you want to know, they're in a problem scenario. What's the ending going to be? Is everyone going to be okay? What's the solution to this? This is what we need to do with our science as well. You want to build up a problem, and then everyone's going to be relieved that you have a solution. So you want to make your audience want to know what happens next. How are we solving this problem? And a way that I find quite useful when thinking about putting science into stories is something called the ABT framework, which stands for and, but, therefore. And I'm not saying that you necessarily have to always use these words to break it up, but I find it very useful when you're thinking about, how do I tell my science as a story? So the and is setting the scene, introducing people to characters, that the equivalent of that in a fictional story. So you're talking about, okay, this is all of the facts that we can agree on. This is the big picture. This is everything we need to know. But here is a problem. And then how are we going to solve it? So there we go. The and is our little introduction, and then think about what your problem is. And every single person in research has a but, has a specific niche problem, because otherwise, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. So your but could be as niche as, but no one has tried this. No one has looked at this. It could be a bit broader. If you are pitching to different audiences, your but could be very, very specific for academics, and it could be like, but no one has tested this specific thing. But for a broader audience, it might be a little bit more general, a little bit more vague, but you're introducing some sort of problem of, we don't know the answer to this question, or we don't have a solution for this problem. So the way that you build that up makes us go, why has no one solved this yet? Or like, how is this still a problem? This is a terrible problem. And so you've got people invested in wanting a solution. So then you kind of ease that tension. You're like, well, this is how I'm going about it. Whether you have done that to completion or not, at least you're resolving it by saying, therefore my research is in this. And so I'm going to be addressing the problem. So I have I have two little examples, and apologies, this is not exactly my field of expertise, but I thought I would have a go at writing an and, but, therefore for perhaps things that are relevant to all of you. Every cell contains thousands of different proteins, and changes in these proteins can reveal what's happening in health and disease. Okay, so those are some facts. We're setting the scene. But we still don't know which protein changes are most important for many different diseases. Like, what's going on in different diseases? And you could be more specific with this. Therefore, I use proteomics to identify the proteins driving disease so that we can uncover new treatment opportunities. So this is just very broad, and you might be more specific than this. But essentially, I'm saying, here are some facts, but we don't know this. This is the problem. This is where we're stuck. And so this is what I'm doing about that. And my other little example is, proteins carry out most of the work inside our cells, and their shape determines how they function. But when proteins fold incorrectly, they can cause diseases like Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's. So this is a problem. Therefore, I study how proteins fold and get their shape so that we can develop better treatments for these diseases. So like I said, sorry, I'm not an expert in proteomics, but this is my attempt at two that were perhaps a little bit more relevant to you. But hopefully you can see what I'm doing is kind of quickly setting the scene and then saying, but here's a problem. So this is what I'm going to do about it. And I just want to highlight at this point that with the and, sometimes a big picture problem is a problem within itself. So if we just look at this, for example, I could even have this many people have Alzheimer's disease and it's awful as part of my and I'm introducing that because I think everyone can agree on those facts. So if I go back for a second, the and is what can we agree on, what's established. So big picture problems, that might still be part of your introduction, but you just need to think about what is my specific problem that I'm addressing. And when you're presenting, you might have multiple problems. You might go, here's a question. We don't know the answer to this, but this. Therefore, I did this experiment and I figured it out. But then that led to this other question and we didn't know the answer to this. Therefore, I did this. And that's actually how I guided a lot of people through my conference presentations when I was presenting sort of like longer ones with a short one. And I know that some of you might be thinking about doing like more of a 3-minute thesis. With a short one, you kind of want to just have one neat, tight story. But if you've got a longer presentation, you can play around with that. And that's how I would literally guide people through slide to slide to slide to slide. It's like, well, I didn't know the answer to this question, but we didn't know this. So therefore I tried to figure it out. But then that led to the next question. So I did this experiment and then I had the answers and kept going. And people seem to really like that style of going, oh, there's an obvious flow to this. There's questions, and we always have more questions. That's the nature of research and science. So you can literally tell people the story of how you went from here to here to here to here, because that's probably what was going in your mind when you were doing your research. But we don't actually often tell our research or share our research like that. So you can think of it as you're the main character of your story and you're kind of guiding people through how you've done your research. So I want you to have a think about what your ABT is. And like I said, you don't have to necessarily use these words, but I think what's really important is to think about what your but is and really make sure that in whatever talk you do, you highlight the but. You need to get us invested in the need for a solution. It's a very common trap to say, hey, look at this wonderful thing. And you've started with the therefore. You're like, here's a solution. And the solution is ticking off this, and this. And you haven't set up this, and this as problems yet. So it's not like we knew that they were problems. So you need to tell us what the problems are so that we can go, oh, it's great that we have an answer. So that's the storytelling. I'm now going to jump into how we might plan a talk. So this is me thinking about like, okay, I've got like 40 minutes to give you as much information as I can. But now taking a step back, thinking about, okay, we're thinking about telling a story. Now, how do we put together a talk? Firstly, think about why you're giving the talk. Is it just because I'm like, oh, I feel like I have to like just go to these conferences and give a talk? But what do you want people to take away from it? Like, why are you sharing your work with a particular audience? Who are you giving the talk to? Audiences are so important. If you take nothing else away from what I say today, always think about who your audience is and what you need to do to tailor your message to your audience. I can tell you that like I have so many different versions of PowerPoints that I've given on all sorts of different topics because I'll tweak every single one of them. You really do need to think about who is your audience every single time. What context do they need and things like that. And I'll talk about that more in depth. So who are we giving the talk to? When is it and where is it? Now I was like, initially, does that really matter? But I actually did a 3-minute thesis in a room. I'd set it up so that I had a slide behind me. There was a line down the middle and I was going to stand on one side of the line and then I was going to cross it and be on the other side. The room I presented in, the microphone and lectern were in the middle and the slides were on either end. So I couldn't do what I anticipated doing. So just like sometimes being wary of the kind of space that you're presenting in, and what's going to be available to you, and how tired are people going to be, and things like that. When and where are a little bit important as well. And then think about what you're going to say. So you've already thought about, why am I actually giving this talk and who is it for? Then think about what the material or the content of your talk is going to be. And then lastly, once you've decided on all that, then you think about the how am I actually going to deliver it now? So these three things, you'll notice that they're color-coded, fit into your planning stage, and then the actual design of your talk, and then lastly, the how is your delivery. So in terms of planning, really think about, what is your goal with this? What would be a successful outcome for your talk? Is it a prize for a talk? Is it you want people to be conversing with you about it? Or you want to get some further insight from other people on your work? Like, what's your goal with presenting at all? Then who is in your audience? You need to think about this for knowing, how is your work relevant to them and why should they care? Now, when I teach science communication over the course of a semester to students, one of my favorite questions to ask them is, in the nicest way possible, why do I care? Because, with everyone having such short attention spans, you need to draw them in. And so talking to people about, for example, okay, for an awful example, say you're talking to a whole bunch of people who don't really believe in science or don't believe in the power of science, about climate change. If you go down the care about the environment route, they might not really go for that. But if you then say, look at how much money we'd save in the economy if we actually did something about climate change, and we could, save on all of the all sorts of industries, actually, like, honestly, think about how agriculture would win, health industries would win, and all sorts of things. Think about the money. They're probably going to care about that a little bit more. So think about why they would care about your work and what element they would care about. What do you want your audience to do and to think and to feel and understand? So what do you want them to kind of take away? What does your audience already know about this topic? How much context do you need to provide so that they can understand what you're talking about? I think we often, when we're talking in our own circles, we use acronyms, we use jargon, we use technical language because that's faster, that's a shortcut. But sometimes we forget about, what do other people know and what are they familiar with? If you think about the acronym ART, for example, for me, ART was antiretroviral therapy. But then I moved into a different school within the university, and now I work with a lot of people who are looking at IVF and animal conservation and things like that. And so ART is now assisted reproductive therapy for a lot of the people that I talk about. So even within science, we think of an acronym, it might mean something else to other people. And lastly, what do you need to know in terms of the location and the timing of your talk? So if it's a 3-minute talk, there's not much time to go, wait, what am I saying? A 3-minute thesis is probably going to be a lot more scripted than a longer talk where you have the chance to waffle or think about where you're going. And then in terms of the design of your presentation, think about what your key message is, and have you crafted it for this audience? Is it targeting what they care about and what they're going to be connecting with? So that's why when I spoke about the example of my work and the fundamental research into the immune system and what do these cells do, when I'm talking to other people in immunology, we all want to know, how is the immune system orchestra kind of being conducted, and how does it all fit together? So they care about, okay, you're looking at their cells. What are they like? What do they do? Whereas when I'm talking to other people in other fields of science, or the general public, in other fields of science, they might care more about what sort of methods I'm using, and could they perhaps tap into that? And if I'm talking to the general public, it's, okay, how is this going to help me one day when I'm thinking about my immune system? So you think about what your key message is for them, what language is appropriate for the audience. So I've mentioned acronyms, but also thinking about all the times that we use technical words. And I'm not saying that you have to avoid jargon. If there are important words for what you want to say, you can introduce them, but just keep in mind how many you're introducing. I've seen some people do really well in introducing a whole bunch of words that they wanted to use. And I'm like, well, you've done a great job in explaining all of these, but you've just explained too many and it's a bit overwhelming. So think about how you can guide people through and hold people's hands a little bit, so that you can tell them about your work without relying too much on jargon. But sometimes, as I said before, it can be a shortcut rather than, so like for me, I used to work on CD1A restricted T cells. That's a mouthful. People don't want to be hearing that every single sentence. So I refer to them as cat cells. And perhaps that's not quite like the formal thing that we call them, but it's just much easier to connect with that, and it's less overwhelming compared to hearing CD1A restricted T cells all the time. And they're like, wait, what was that again? Think about what you can leave out. And I think this is really important, thinking about how you can be as concise as possible, because when we strip it down, you've got one key message. So what is that? And then everything else, that's like it's a bonus, extra details, things like that. So you can strip it down to an ABT. One activity that I love doing in science communication workshops like this, doesn't quite work over a webinar, but thinking about, okay, talk about your work in 2 minutes, and then talk about it in 1 minute, and then 30 seconds, and then see if you can do 15 seconds. So trying to distill more and more and more, and do that without just speaking double speed. And when you do that, you think about, okay, when we get down to 15 seconds, what are like the 3 sentences that I need to say to anyone to tell them what my work is? So perhaps that's a little challenge for you to do. Think about how you're going to tell a story, and ABT is really useful for that, even just in the planning stage and the thinking stage. And really highlight what's the problem that you're trying to solve and why does it matter. And in terms of just straight up design and design of slides, you do want to minimize text and build slides sequentially. When you've got a whole lot on your slide, that can be very overwhelming, a little bit alienating. And in terms of building slides sequentially, if I had all 6 dot points in one go, you'd probably be like, I've read to the bottom already. So think about how you're going to focus and pull focus onto the parts that you want people to be looking at or focusing on. Because if you had read all 6 dot points before I'd finished talking about dot point number 1, you haven't properly listened to what I've said about it. And this is something called the Colavita effect. So we're very, very visual kind of people. And so your audience is going to be reading rather than listening to you, or like not fully appreciating what you're saying. And lastly, the delivery, thinking about what your key message is. How are you going to draw people in? What's your hook? How are you going to start off? And how are you going to capture your audience's attention? How are you going to connect with your audience and keep them engaged? So remember, it's important to get their attention, but then to hold it and keep it, and think about maybe how you can be relatable to your audience, or how you can be interesting in the way that you deliver. Think about what you're communicating with your body and your eyes and your voice. You definitely don't want to kind of be monotonal. You want to vary how you're talking, change up your tone, do things with your body. And I think, especially online, and I'm not really keeping an eye on myself, so I have no idea how I'm going with this. But when you're presenting online, for example, I had to learn, oh, my hands are like down here, and sometimes I was gesticulating, and so I was like making points, and so my hands were like flying in and out, and that's just distracting, as opposed to me stepping back a little bit means that you can see my hands, and so when I am making points, you can say I'm doing 1, 2, 3, or whatever it might be, and you have to be a little bit more deliberate with it. So watching yourself back is so cringy sometimes, but it's very important when you're thinking about how do you improve. So it was me watching myself back that made me go, ooh, I should probably think about that. Don't read and don't memorize. Now, I say this, but take it with a tiny pinch of salt. When I say don't read a script. But when I say don't memorize, I am very aware that for something like a 3-minute thesis, I said before, you don't have time to think about where you're going. So you might have a script. And I certainly write scripts. Even for perhaps longer talks, I might write it because I know that that works for me, and it helps me build in where my pauses are going to be. It helps me sort of work out where my points are and what I want to say. But when I actually come to delivering it, I am not just reciting stuff that I've written on a page. I've thought about, okay, this is my point, and I'm going to go from here to here to here to here. And also, very importantly, if you are writing a script, I am very conscious of the fact that you need to write in the way that you talk. We write very differently to how we speak. When we write, our tone is often a little bit more formal. So think about how you are going to keep that conversational tone. So for some people, it's actually better to not write anything. But the reason why I say don't read and don't memorize is because you don't want it to come across as I'm just reading this and I'm not actually having a conversation with you. Or when it comes to memorization, it means that if something throws you and you're like, where was I? That can be very distracting. That can be very off-putting, and you have no idea where you are and where to go from that. So for that 3-minute thesis that I did, where I like planned to be on either side of a slide, I was a little thrown. And so I kind of was like, oh my gosh, what is my entire script? And then I just broke it down. I was like, you know what? I'm studying this. This is the problem that I'm doing, and this is how I'm trying to solve it. And I went back to that like sort of A, B, T, that story, and got some points out, and was happy enough with that. So yeah, you really don't want to just have to go, oh, here's a script that I've perfectly memorized, and then if anything happens, you're thrown. Now, I get nervous. Nerves are good. I present for a living, and I still get nervous in front of people. So I'm not saying that you ever want to completely get rid of nerves, but knowing how to deal with them is really important. And for me, it's about reframing it. When I used to be nervous, my mum would always say like, oh, just breathe, just breathe. And that's all very well and good. But when you have a lot of adrenaline, just breathing doesn't make the adrenaline disappear. That's not how our physiology works. So what I try to do now is reframe it in my mind to go, oh, instead of like, I'm so nervous, I'm so nervous, I'm excited to do this, because you're also going to have a lot of adrenaline with that. And so I sort of do that little reframing. But yes, I do want to acknowledge that I get very nervous about things. Sometimes when I do have a little bit more of a scripted talk, that is when I get the most nervous. And so that's why I'm kind of wary of saying, try not to do that too much, because I know what it does to me, and I just get very, very nervous of like, what if I forget everything? And I sometimes will shake in like before I get up in front of the audience and talk. Once I'm talking, I'm like, okay, there's nothing I can do now. I'm going for it. But nerves just mean that you care. And so I think that's important to recognize. And, ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? You're going to be your own worst critic. So, my 3-minute thesis that I thought I botched, people aren't going to remember that. It's me that does. So, don't stress too much. So just to sum that up, remember to hook in your audience, draw them in, tell them a story, and then end with impact. Make sure that you're like bringing it home. So as some top tips for public speaking, really think about your audience. I did say that's like the key takeaway message I want you to think about for today. Don't fall into the trap of simply presenting facts without a narrative. When we are in science, we're like, facts speak for themselves. And, they do to an extent, but not to everyone. So think about the story or the narrative. Share your genuine enthusiasm and passion. If you are researching something, I'm guessing you are interested enough to be researching it. So share that. I'm not saying that you necessarily have to be like super over the top and bubbly and be like, this is the best thing ever since sliced bread, this research. But just be you with how you're doing it. As someone who was in immunology, I can tell you with authority that enthusiasm is infectious. So if you clearly care about what you're saying, people are naturally going to care a little bit more about what you're saying too. Before I move on, like, have you ever had a lecturer? Like, I've definitely had lecturers who are talking about their whole life's work and they just sound so bored. And you're like, how have you dedicated 20 years of your life to this? So you don't want to be that person. Your slides are there to enhance, not distract. So you don't want them to be overwhelming. When I have like graphs and things like that, or figures that are explaining certain points, I don't think about, okay, what's the title of this graph? I like put the main message, like the main takeaway point from that graph or from that figure on the top, so that people can see that, and then they can like still digest it for themselves, but they're not like spending time just going like, well, no. Main message is there. So you want people to be clear in what they're trying to get from your slides, and remember that nerves are good. And practice. I know that people say that, but I said I get nervous, but I feel more comfortable in these nerves now because I know I can trust myself more, because the more I've done it, the more I'm like, okay, well, I know I will be nervous, but once I'm doing it, I will be okay. And I'm feeling more comfortable in that discomfort. And give feedback to people and get feedback. When you are thinking critically about how other people are presenting, then that means that you're thinking about what makes a good talk and what makes like perhaps a less good talk, or what detracts from a talk. So that's useful for you to think about. So you can give people feedback or like think critically about other people's presentations, and then get feedback. That's really important as well. When I was practicing for like a 3-minute thesis or a similar kind of talk, I practice it on so many people and get all their feedback. And you don't necessarily take everyone's suggestions, but it's very useful to do that. Just very, very quickly thinking about specifically a 3-minute thesis, you want to use, you've only got a short amount of time. So use short words, sentences, and paragraphs, because you want to be thinking about how is this flowing in your 3 minutes. Use active verbs over passive verbs. It's so easy in science to be like, this was done. But no. Take ownership of what you're doing. You're doing great research, I presume. So say, I'm doing this. Avoid jargons and acronyms and academic words, because people aren't used to hearing about this work. And so, having a little bit more technicalities can just make it harder to wade through to what the message is, even if you're explaining them. Write heaps and then cut back. Think about what details can we cut out? How do we distill to the core message? Read it out loud to yourself so that you know it's conversational, you know how it all flows, and really make sure that you've got a hook to draw people in right from the start. And think about that story. How are you starting? What story are you telling in the middle, and how are you ending? Think about why people care, and you might be connecting your story to the real world with that, but think about the journey that you're taking your listener on. What sort of story are you telling? And remember 3 minutes is really, really short. So you've only got time for one one key thing. You might be doing heaps of great work with multiple projects, but you've only got time for one thing. And I know that 3 minutes often feels like I have to say everything all at once. It's so fast. But pauses are important too. And that's why I said I like writing those scripts out so that I can be like, pause, pause, pause here. Because you want to deliver something punchy, get people to think about it, and then keep going. Give people time to digest. So that's where I'm going to leave it. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Also, if science communication is something that you're kind of interested in and you like the idea of chatting or yapping about your research, I do have a science radio show that I kind of use as a platform to showcase scientists all around the world, but I do also use it as a bit of a training platform as well, because sometimes we do pre-recorded episodes for people who are like, I want to give this a go, but I've never I'm not quite comfortable sharing my work with a more general audience, and especially not on live radio. So you can definitely reach out if you're interested in giving that a bit of a go. But I would like to point out I have a great teaching team at the University of Melbourne, and we have a podcast called Let's Talk SciComm, which is mostly spearheaded by two of my colleagues. And we do have an episode about 3-minute theses and how to give a short talk. So lots of useful resources there, perhaps. So I'm going to stop sharing, and we have a little bit of time for questions. I do see that the chat has things.
Thank you so much, Katrina. That was lovely. Like, I really, really appreciate your talk. And I got so many tips, and I think not just for me, but for the audience. So, as Paula said in the beginning, we are now open for questions. So if you don't want to speak out, you can just write your questions in the chat, and we are gonna read. So I think we have two questions right now. Um, Also, thank you so much for the people who are here. So it's really nice to have you all here, and yeah, we do this for the audience, right? So if we don't have people, there is no meaning of sharing. And yeah, so thank you for taking your time and join us. So we have a first really nice, I think, question from Maximilian. He said, which advice you personally received on scientific communication has been your favorite?
Um, yeah, I was reading it and thinking about it. I think be you is really important, because sometimes I feel like I'm putting on, or sometimes I used to feel like I was putting on a persona to give a presentation. And I feel so much more comfortable now going, you know what, I'm going to stand in front of you. I'm just going to be me. You're going to be you. I'm going to just react to how we're vibing. Um, so I deliver science shows, and I deliver them from kinder all the way up to adults now. And I think learning how to just be me means that I can be so adaptable to whatever's going on in front of me. And it just helps me feel a little bit more comfortable. So I think that's really important. Something that I didn't say, that I'll just maybe throw in there now as well. It's one of my like little things that I share with other people, and people are like, oh, really? People talk about watching yourself back and recordings and things, and that is useful, but also practicing in front of a mirror. It is very off-putting. And if you don't distract yourself, like I'm talking more specifically for a 3-minute thesis or something where you don't really have the time to slip up. If you can not distract yourself, that's great. But also you can see how you're coming across as you present. So that's one of my little quirky bits of advice that I give to people.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, I was thinking while you were presenting, because I think to deal with your nerves, it's really hard. And as you said, I think everyone else, it's not so comfortable about talking from outside, to everyone. And I think everyone have a little bit of fear of being judging and so on. And one thing that actually helped me, and I don't know if you agree, it's like I try to imagine myself presenting. So if I have access to that room, I try to imagine myself presenting in that specific room because somehow that teaches my brain that, okay, you need to be prepared for that time. So I don't know if you ever thought about that, but for me, it works quite nicely. And I think that's maybe it's a good tip for someone.
Yeah, or if you get access to the space, just doing it in the space. Yeah, just being a bit comfortable
Yeah,
there.
that's even better.
Absolutely. I'll jump in with one more. So we get another question from Iram. We actually have two from Maximilian, but we'll jump around a little bit just so to spread it out. So Iram asked, how do you strike a balance when the audience is a mix of scientists and lay people? And by the way, Katrina, awesome presentation. And what Iram has asked, I was thinking the same. Like it is hard, right, to get a sense of your entire audience. So how do you kind of make sure that you're hitting the right mark for different kinds of audiences?
Yeah, it is a really good question because you think about like, oh, well, I want to make sure that general audiences understand, but then also, the scientists might want like a little bit more meat to the bones that you're presenting. And so how I try to do it is at least think about the analogies and the stories. And if I am using enough analogies and explaining things and guiding people through, it means that I am ensuring people can follow along but also giving enough details and enough science that the scientists are happy too. Yeah.
Yep.
Can you go ahead and read the last one, Paula?
Yeah, sure. So there's another one from Maximilian. So if you're asked to give feedback during one of your workshops, which are the aspects that you're paying most attention to? So if you're asked to give feedback during one of your workshops.
Um, that's a great question for me right now because I'm literally in the middle of marking a whole bunch of oral presentations. And like I have the notes here. I can look at like the biggest things that I say across them. But the structure is a big one that I have talked about. I'm like, you've told me a solution before you've told me what the problem is. And that's okay. Like it's all right if that's, your hook, but then you like your opening sentence and then you go back and then you give some context. But people sometimes don't set up their problem enough so that I'm like, this is a problem that needs to be fixed. Um, Several people, even though we say in our classes, like start with a hook, don't say, hi, my name is Catriona, and they do that. And you're like, no, just get into the hook. Do it. I think those are the two biggest that I like just recently come across in a whole bunch of talks. But the third thing, and I said my favorite question is why do we care? Have they tailored it to why this specific audience would be interested and engaged with their talk? Because sometimes we have wild audiences and sometimes we have captive audiences. If we're talking to a whole bunch of people in a conference, they're captive, they're all perhaps in that field, so they're all invested. Sometimes we're talking to people who've never heard of what we do before. They might not have heard of your field or they don't really know much about it. And so that's more of a wild audience. And so it can be a little bit harder to draw them in and go, this is why you need to care about what I'm saying to you right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So we have another question that is from Virginie. It's in your experience, what visual elements in slides are most effective for helping audience remember key messages?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
can I lump in an extra bit to that, Katrina, because I know we're running out of time. So with that question, if you can add in there as well, because 3-minute theses, you're only allowed one slide for the HUPO presentation in particular, for the HUPO competition. So can you talk about that along with the question?
Yes, I had this, and then I was like, oh no, do I show this? Do I not show this? So yeah, with a 3-minute thesis, I would recommend having one image. Like, don't try and have a diagram. Don't try and have anything complicated. Just one thing. A personal touch or something that makes people go like, whoa. I know I haven't built up this slide sequentially. It's because I already went let's just quickly look at this slide. You want to complement what you're saying. This goes always. You don't want anyone to be thinking like, oh, what are you trying to show there, or like, what are you? It should just be like, I'm talking, and this is obviously directly linked and relevant. And see if you can somehow weave your message in. If there's emotion, you can play around with that, and just make sure it's legible, it's clear, it's concise. But yeah, for a 3 minute thesis, I recommend like one image that people can engage with. Or it might be something like I've seen a great 3 minute thesis where it was just like someone who was doing like an eye test and they just had that one eye test and they're like, do the thing, now listen to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Do you think she's with some problems in her connection? Or maybe it's me?
Oh, potentially, yeah. I can hear you okay, Jessica. I think we're. Oh, no, she's back. She's back.
Yes, sorry. I changed internet providers this week, so
I think we might have one, maybe time for one or two more. I can't see any coming through, but I've got one that I'll throw in there. So Katrina, very on trend, right? AI, agents, and so forth. Like, how are you leveraging this amazing tooling for your work and to help you communicate? Like, what sort of ways are you using it?
Okay, so I have really thought about, what can we do that's different to what AI can do. Sometimes I use it to help like brainstorm potential ways that I might talk about things, potential analogies, and explanations. But we are always going to be more creative than AI. So for example, when thinking about a hook, I have bounced ideas off AI. And the best example I can think of is when I was I was creating a little thing about giant spider crabs in the Great Southern Ocean and the Great Southern Reef. And I was like talking about it and I was bouncing ideas off AI and AI suggested for a hook I should talk about like, oh, here's a stat on like how diverse it is, or 70% of Australians have like live within 50 kilometers of the Great Southern Reef, but they don't know about it. And then I was like, no, 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 no. After bouncing all these ideas, what I came up with was, do you prefer being on the top or the bottom? If you're a giant spider crab, you want to be on the bottom because blah, 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 blah. Like as a giant pile, you don't want to be on top where a predator can come in. So, AI wouldn't have come up with that. So, thinking about bouncing off ideas is useful. Using it to especially think about explanations when you haven't thought about, oh, what would work for this audience can help you shape that. But then always making sure that you have final say. Don't go with what it necessarily suggests.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I can have actually one more question, if we don't have anything on the chat. No, I don't think so. Yeah, I have actually two things. For you, I think that's kind of depends on who is presenting, but for you, how do you prefer, which pronoun do you prefer to use? I did or we did? Because in science we never did think
A
alone,
good
right?
question. Yeah.
It's a good question. Um, I I think when you're presenting, say I did this. You're going to acknowledge the team at the end. We usually have acknowledgements, things like that. 3 minute thesis, you don't have time for that, but for 3 minute thesis, you're talking about your work. Um, so I would say because that's much more personable. You're taking ownership of what you are doing. And then, everyone gets it. When you're talking about it to other scientists, everyone knows that there's a team behind everything that we put out. Like there are multiple authors on a paper, but there's always going to be one first author paper, like I, as first author person, did this with these people's support. And so it just sounds so much better when you do say I rather than saying like, oh, we did this, we did this, we did this. When you are talking definitely about what a team's doing, you can highlight that. You said like, as part of a team, we did this, and this. But for most of a presentation, I would suggest I. But suss out what your audience would want as well. But that is my general recommendation.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, okay. If we don't have anyone else, I can also have another, but that it's more general and maybe it's a little harder for you because it's not exactly your shoes. what's the tip that you would give for a non-English native speaker? Because I think the most of us, we are not native speakers, like, and it's, of course, it's harder when you need to present, especially in 3 minutes presentation when you have such a short time. So yeah, what are the best tips that you think?
I think for people that I've seen, I have a lot of international students, and they can deliver excellent content. It's the delivery though, and thinking about what your tone is like, because for some of my students, like they're saying great things but they just sound so bored with it, or they sound like they are reading something even when they're not. Or sometimes like it's about the speed that is coming out. So I think thinking about your tone and how you're coming across. For some, I find that you have to slow down just to make sure that everyone can understand, because perhaps they're not familiar with your accent, and that's just a natural thing. But I think yeah, that's probably my biggest thing, like pacing and how you are presenting it, because whether English is your first language or not your first language, we can all think of creative ideas as to how, like what to say, but it's the how you say it as well.
Great.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a great way to finish up on there. I think we've just hit over a 1 minute past, and I think we've got a couple of people who have to leave on the hour. So, Jesse, we might, or Leah, we might flick to the closing slides, perhaps. But before we do, Catriona, thank you so much for your time. So it was completely voluntary for Catriona to be here. Like I said, when I first jumped on the call with her, she was like, "Yep, absolutely," like very excited about it. So please, yep, someone's just done a big clap, like use your emojis as you see fit. But yeah, thank you so much, Catriona. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. All the best, everyone, with your talks.
So now just to finish, so yeah, again, thank you so much, Catriona. Thank you so much, Paula, to join and help in hosting this session. It was really, really nice to have you all. Thank you all again for joining us here. And I would like just to give information about our next webinar that will gonna happen in September, and 8th of September, with Julia Martinez. And this one will be more about visual scientific communication. So today we have oral scientific communication with Catriona, and the next one it's about visual scientific communication. So please register yourself if you didn't do yet. So in the chat you can have the link if you are interested in. So please go ahead and register yourself. And last but not least, I hope that you all join us for the HUPO that it's coming in Singapore. So it will be in the end of September, in the beginning of October. So I hope to see you all there. And yeah, thank you so much for our organization, and thank you so much for you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye.